The last few years have seen a host of scientific discoveries, and many of these more exciting cases have been within the field of archaeology. The field unravels the history and cultural practices of human civilization, telling us all about the past and giving us insights into the making of modern society. So today we'll be taking a look at these 3 archaeological discoveries. 13th century priest's tomb discovered in Egypt's Luxor. On Saturday, the 24th of November 2018, a tomb dating back to the 13th century was unveiled following a 5-month-long excavation. This was according to the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. The long-term excavation project took place in Luxor, one of Egypt's most well-known cities, famously called Thebes in ancient Egypt. This particular work was performed near the River Nile's west bank. After 5 months of work, conducting a long process of carefully calculated digging and cutting, the excavation was complete, revealing the tomb of a priest and his wife. This momentous project was undertaken by an Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities mission, and the discovery it resulted in was rather impressive. The tomb that was uncovered donned scenes inside it, showcasing the priest and his family together. Khalid El-Nani referred to the remains of them during a press conference discussing the discovery as being in exceptional condition. The priest that was laid to rest within the tomb was Thor Ikretfor. The ministry informed the public that he had played a role of great importance, as he had been in charge of overlooking the mummification shrine at Luxor's Egypt Mut Temple. Alongside the colorful scenes within the tomb, there were sarcophagi of Thor Ikretfor and his wife. Completing the tomb were 1,000 Ashabdi. For the not-so-informed archaeology fans amongst us, a sarcophagus is a stone coffin which usually looks like a sculpture or holds a significant inscription. These are typically associated with ancient Egypt. Ashabdi are funerary figurines intended to serve as a magical substitute to replace their now passed-away owner if requested by the gods to complete not-so-prestigious tasks in the afterlife. Their name, whilst undertaking a number of spelling variants, is often translated to Ansara, though this is a fairly frequent topic of debate amongst archaeologists and linguists alike. Often made of blue or green glazed Egyptian faience, they typically range between 5 and 30 centimeters in height and stand within the tomb, accompanying the deceased in the afterlife. Coincidentally, a French team of archaeologists announced an entirely distinct discovery on the same day. The French Institute for Technology and the University of Strasbourg collaboratively researched and undertook work leading to the discovery of yet another preserved sarcophagus, this one belonging to a female mummy named Thuja. Excitingly, the dating of Thuja's sarcophagus has placed her during the 18th dynasty, an iconic era in Egyptian history, most notably including pharaohs such as the famous Ramses II and Tutankhamun. Not only do these exciting discoveries advance the field of archaeology, but the promotion of this research aids to improve the tourism in Egypt, a once relied on economic sector now in need of recovery. The Temple of Angkor Wat was bounded by a mysterious structure 1.5 kilometers long. In December of 2015, it was discovered that the world's largest religious monument is actually even bigger than we once thought, among other brilliant insights provided by this research team. The Temple of Angkor Wat, located in Cambodia, Southeast Asia, has been thought of as the world's largest religious monument for hundreds of years. Having been built in the 12th century, once at the heart of the Khmer Empire. Bringing a modern twist to this knowledge, however, is the work of a team of Australian archaeologists who have found we can actually expand the recorded size of the temple thanks to their use of ground-penetrating radar whilst investigating the Angkor Wat complex. The research mission dubbed the Greater Angkor Project was led by Australian researchers and Dr. Damien Evans, who work with the University of Sydney. Their investigation revealed more components to the temple than we had previously known of, as well as the complex being bounded on the south side by a large structure, adding to the previously recorded size of this record-holding temple. When speaking on behalf of the team, Professor Fletcher said the structure, which has dimensions of more than 1,500 meters by 600 meters, is the most striking discovery with Angkor Wat to date. Despite this being a fascinating finding, there is still plenty we are yet to uncover. To date, the purpose and function of the structure remains unknown, and we are yet to find a parallel or otherwise similar structure in any other Angkorian works. Aside from the large adjoined structure, the team also discovered buried towers that had been assembled and removed throughout the period, estimated to encompass the dates surrounding the construction and first uses of the temple at the Angkor Wat site. Even more new information has come to light as a result of this investigation, challenging the misconceptions surrounding the temple. For decades, centuries even, we had held the assumption that on the land neighboring Angkor Wat stood similarly sacred precincts and cities of religious importance. However, this team has found there to be evidence of a sparse population's housing among these areas. The research team believe this could suggest residential use of the land, theories supported by the findings of roads, ponds, and mounds. Current speculation says that these were all used by people working within the temple, in positions of service, largely such as priests. Another fascinating revelation made courtesy of this project is the discovery of wooden structures having been created to secure and strengthen Angkor Wat. Archaeologists predict that these wooden structures have been implemented towards the more modern end of the temple's history, leading Dr. Fletcher to describe it as a possible last attempt at defense, an opinion expressed through his statement. Angkor Wat is the first and only known example of an Angkorian temple being systematically modified for use in a defensive capacity. The placement of these defenses on a more modern timeline estimated between 1297 and 1585 AD suggests that the addition of the defenses could have been in an effort to resist the growing influence of the city Ayutthaya, a city nearby. Dr. Fletcher summarized with the concluding thoughts, "Either data makes the defenses of Angkor Wat one of the last major constructions at Angkor and is perhaps indicative of its end. This relatively recent points to both the complexity of human civilization and the momentous discoveries that continue to lie ahead of us, and the abundance of new leads and information to have come from one research team is a true testament to their important work." Scientists find evidence of ancient Denisovans on Tibetan Plateau. In late 2020, an expansion of research into the Denisovans took place, revealing more about the subspecies of archaic humans. For a little over a decade, we have known about the existence of the Denisovans, a now extinct species biologically and evolutionarily related to both modern-day humans and the Neanderthals. Bone fragments found in the Denisova cave, hence their name, underwent genome sequencing and other genetic tests to confirm their place in the evolutionary timeline of humans. However, outside of the Denisova cave, located in the Altai Mountains in Siberia, scientists have struggled to find evidence further confirming their existence or societal patterns and behaviors. That is until new research began to emerge. In late 2020, research published within the journal Science presented a hypothesis that the Denisovans spread their presence throughout Asia over a broad basis, having relations with human ancestors to people living within 21st century Asia. This idea is based upon the premise that the Denisovans diverged from the Neanderthals about 400,000 years ago. The evidence for these assumptions is rooted in the remains of DNA found within the sedimentary rocks of cave walls. These caves underwent excavation, allowing the sediments to be removed and analyzed. From the entrance to the Bayshir Cast Cave, Bayshir Cast Cave is a limestone cavern situated on the northeast of the Tibetan Plateau, known as the Roof of the World due to its high elevation. The characteristic genetic mutations found within Denisovan humans were present in the genetic analysis, providing evidence that the Denisovans had been within Asia. Co-author Charles Perot, associate professor at the School of Human Evolution and Social at Arizona State University, and his research team found over 1,300 artifacts and 580 bone fragments during this project. This has given an insight into the abilities of the groups, as many of these artifacts were composed of flaked sandstone and hornstone river cobbles, whilst the bones from gazelles, foxes, rhinoceros, and other animals give an insight into the surroundings and wildlife. Markers such as wildlife can be assessed as useful, as flowing water has the ability to distort where sediments may lie. However, we do currently consider the Denisovans to have been genetically adapted in some manner to survive at high altitudes, such as those presented on the Tibetan Plateau with relative ease. The modern-day ability for many Tibetans to survive in these high altitudes provides a tenuous link to the development of modern humans in the area. We cannot know if the Denisovans and modern-day Asian populations are more closely genetically linked than, say, Europeans just yet, though the current research suggests this possibility is not too far-fetched. Archaeological research is continuing to progress in leaps and bounds. It is astonishing how little we know and how much there is to discover about our very own pasts. What do you make of these interesting discoveries? The ocean is an ominous place. It is a place of great allure and great uncertainty. We know not what dwells beneath the depths or what the passage of time might have concealed underneath the glittering waves. A mere estimated 5% of the ocean has been discovered. Fallen civilizations, mythological beings, or even proof of alien technology may be hidden down in the dark, murky abyss of the Earth's seas. Besides, anything goes on international waters. It is difficult to determine which nation should take charge of missing persons cases that occur on cruise ships and boats. Missing people are typically assumed dead, forever resting at the bottom of the sea with the other undiscovered mysteries. So today, we'll be taking a look at 3 mysteries and discoveries of the ocean. Deep Sea Expedition uncovers 30 new species, plus longest known animal. It is widely accepted that the sea contains thousands of as yet undiscovered creatures. It seems that every time a research team dives to new depths, they uncover a host of new species. And the April 2020 expedition was no exception. A team of scientists from multiple institutes combined forces to document 20 dives and 180 hours of footage of the Ningaloo Canyons in the Indian Ocean captured by a deep-sea diving robot called ROV Sebastian. The robot was able to penetrate to depths of over 4,500 meters and captured video of many species that had not been seen in the area before, as well as several apparently entirely new species. Among these new discoveries was a giant red hydroid, which is a relative of the coral that appeared to be over a meter tall, as well as a new member of the Apolemia that is estimated to be over 47 meters long, making it the longest animal ever recorded. Technically, the Apolemia is made up of a giant colony of cell-like creatures called zooids and is classified as a siphonophore. Because it is made up of millions of tiny individual creatures, some would say that the Apolemia in itself cannot be classified as its own entity. However, siphonophores are particularly fascinating because each of the zooids, despite being individual creatures and not cells, act as if they were, each carrying out specific functions that contribute to the viability of the larger whole, such as food digestion, reproduction, and propulsion. The Apolemia is without a doubt a creature of otherworldly proportions, as it was glimpsed of the diving robot. The structure is not where the extraterrestrial illusions stop either, as the zooids are described by scientists as a jelly made of millions of interconnected clones, with each clone being specialized to do one of a dozen different tasks. What makes this specimen stand out so vividly for researchers is its enormous size. Most siphonophore colonies that have been observed so far have been between 17 centimeters and 1 meter long, entirely dwarfed by the 47-meter length of this colony, whose hunting spiral spread across almost a 16-meter diameter, with tendrils dangling into the water below. The discovery of such an enormous example of a species already known has excited researchers about the immense possibilities for what could lie beyond the realm of our exploration, and one of those things could be millions more giant siphonophore galaxies just like this one, simply waiting to be discovered. Among the other species that were observed in the dives into the deep sea off of Western Australia were bioluminescent squid, glass sponges, long-tailed sea cucumbers, mollusks, barnacles, and squat lobsters that were previously not known to inhabit this part of the ocean. Specimens from the dives were collected and will be on display in Australia. With its mysteries, and we may never truly know exactly how many unknown species lie hidden and undiscovered in the uncharted depths. Researchers keep changing their mind on how big Megalodon was. The prehistoric Megalodon was the massive great-grandfather of the sharks that lurk among beaches today. Researchers studying fossilized skeletons of the Megalodon agreed that it was undoubtedly one of the largest shark species to ever roam the ocean. However, They were previously unable to agree upon exactly how large this creature was until a recent study answered these questions once and for all. The massive beast lived from around 23 million years ago until 3 million years ago, and fossilized remains of its teeth, which are as large as human hands, have finally cracked the code in allowing scientists to definitively estimate the truly massive proportions of the megalodon. Sharks' multiple rows of teeth mean that they frequently shed them, sometimes as often as once a week, and the next tooth in the row moves forward to take its place. Since the teeth grow proportionately with the shark, and on average a shark will lose 2,000 teeth in its lifetime, paleontologists at the University of Bristol and Swansea University were able to take rare fossilized megalodon teeth and compare them with teeth of modern-day species to chart a growth curve for the ancient beast. The growth curve generated mathematical calculations which were used to determine the previously undetermined proportions of the megalodon, and these proportions were mammoth indeed. The shark would have reached adult size at around 18 meters, with a tail length of an average of 4 meters and weighing upwards of 48 tons. Clocking in at more than twice the size of a modern-day great white shark, the megalodon is by far the largest shark species to have existed. Its dorsal fin alone would have been as tall as the average adult male, and the bite force behind those multiple rows of teeth was estimated to be over 10 tons, of only 2 tons. Serrated bite marks on the fossilized bones of animals unfortunate enough to be preyed to the megalodon act as a testament to the incredible strength of those jaws. The megalodon, meaning giant tooth, is aptly named, with teeth over 3 times the size of the great white shark, which is its closest modern-day relative. There is no doubt that those massive jaws ruled the sea in its time. Octopus are walking on shore. Octopuses are some of the most well-known sea creatures with their curious 8 tentacles, incredible intelligence, camera-like eyeballs, and slimy bodies. However, a local marine guide from Wales, upon returning from a sunset dolphin watching expedition, witnessed an octopus in a place where he never expected to see one on dry land. He reported seeing over 24 of the creatures, crawling up out of the water on the tips of their tentacles and moving onto the sand as though part of some mass migration. And soon other locals made reports of a similar nature. It is not unheard of for octopi to take a stroll outside of the water occasionally. Those that live in shallow waters near tide pools frequently use the tips of their tentacles to crawl from pool to pool in search of prey, sometimes embarking on longer stretches if they are especially unlucky in the hunt. A popular octopus at the National Aquarium of New Zealand proved his prowess as an escape artist by crawling out of his tank, across the room, down a drainage pipe, and into the sea. However, scientists are baffled as to why so many of the creatures were existing in a group to such a sandy stretch of beach, one with no tide pools or chance of finding food. They breathe through gills and can only survive out of water for very short stretches of time and must remain moist in order to be able to absorb oxygen from the water on their skin, which is why they have never been known to attempt such a long stretch out of the water. Several octopuses were discovered the next morning having died after drying out too much. Scientists are baffled as to what could cause these small, hand-sized cephalopods to behave in such a dangerous manner. It is possible that a huge change in their environment, brought on by incredibly rough seas around the time that they were spotted, local pollution, or an unusually low tide, could have disorientated the octopi enough that they mistakenly clambered onto dry land. Other theories include illness or parasitic infection, although the creatures that were discovered the next morning appeared to have been in perfect health and died from drying out rather than any infection. Alarmingly, scientists don't know what has caused these octopuses to behave in this manner, and are carefully studying the species for any clues. But what do you make of these ocean mysteries and discoveries? Despite the amazing technological advances of recent years, the Earth is constantly offering up new mysteries that leave scientists scrambling for answers as they attempt to make sense of this planet we call home. From the isolated Russian tundra to the remote South Pole, new mysteries are constantly revealing themselves as new discoveries are made. So today we will be looking at 3 interesting discoveries. Scientists climb into Siberian sinkhole. In July of 2014, 3 massive sinkholes mysteriously appeared in northern Siberia, leaving scientists scratching their heads as they looked for an explanation as to why so many sinkholes of such large proportions appeared out of nowhere. Later that same year, a team of Russian scientists with the Russian Center of Arctic Exploration led by Vladimir Pushkarev ventured into the bottom of one of the sinkholes. In the search for some answers, the sinkhole was so deep that the team had to use ropes to propel themselves 34 feet to the bottom, where they took probes, measurements, and samples and attempted to get to the bottom of what could have caused the sinkholes and whether we should be alarmed at their appearance. Although they have not been able to definitively say what caused the 3 initial sinkholes, whatever it is did not stop with just 3. In the years following the expedition to the sinkhole floor, at least 15 more have appeared across Siberia. These holes appear as deep caverns and funnels and are of an ever-increasing magnitude, leading scientists to study them even more intensely as they hunt for the source. The prevailing theory of the sinkhole creation is that methane is building up underneath the Siberian permafrost covering the Earth's surface, and then it releases in a colossal burst that causes the formation of the gaping caverns. Many think that drilling for gas reserves and other such activities in the region could be triggering this methane buildup, leading to the concerning number of explosions in recent years, while others attribute the cause to instability created in the tundra as a result of global warming, and still others believe it to be a combination of the two. Although the true cause of the creation of these sinkholes has yet to be determined, one thing is for sure: must be genuinely great. One of the largest and most recent sinkholes measured over 30 meters deep and 20 meters across, meaning that only an incredibly powerful explosion of some sort could have created it. Yevgeny Shuvalin, the leader of an expedition into this newest crater and researcher at Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology Center for Hydrocarbon Recovery, has been attempting to find the root cause of the craters for years. He said the following: "Right now, there is no single accepted theory on how these complex phenomena are formed. It is possible that they have been forming for years, but it is hard to estimate the numbers. Since craters usually appear in uninhabited and largely pristine areas of the Arctic, there is often no one to see and report them even now. Craters are mostly found by accident, during routine, non-scientific helicopter flights, or by reindeer herders and hunters. This means that there could be more sinkholes on top of the ones that we've already discovered." Further muddling the scientists' search for an explanation is the fact that the sinkholes turn into small lakes relatively quickly after appearing, meaning that if samples are to be taken from the bottom, scientists must not only stumble upon the hole in the Siberian permafrost by chance, but then also move quickly enough to obtain samples and study the formation before it fills with water. Although continued study of the craters leads teams closer and closer to a solution with every sample taken, for now we are simply left to wonder at the massive forces that could be behind such an impressive explosion, and what it might mean for us humans and the planet that we live on. Stardust found buried in Antarctic snow. Analysis of Antarctic snow is a common way for researchers to assess the ecosystem and environmental health of the region. So when a team of Antarctic researchers shoveled over 500 kilograms of the snow into packing crates that were shipped to research labs for analysis, they were not entirely sure what they would find. However, what the tests revealed surprised even them. The snow that was analyzed contained iron-60, incredibly rare iron isotope that had previously only been found in the deepest parts of the ocean floor and is not naturally produced anywhere on Earth. However, the difference between the iron in the crust of the ocean floor and that found in the powdery fresh Antarctic snow is that the iron in the ocean was likely from cosmic explosions millions of years ago and was preserved when the Earth was formed, while the iron in the snow is probably no older than 20 years. When stars explode, meteors crash, or the Earth orbits past space dust, it is quite common for these little bits of cosmic particles to fall through our atmosphere and land on the Earth's surface. However, this space dust is usually composed of things that are not foreign to our planet, since the planet was formed from the same basic building blocks as the solar system around it. Therefore, the iron-60 likely arrived from a source beyond our Milky Way, making it even more remarkable that there was so much of it. Although it is possible that nuclear tests and power plants could have polluted the region with a small amount of iron-60, scientists found an overwhelming amount of it in the Antarctic snow, hundreds of times more than could be attributed to an earthly source. Particles that make up space dust are usually created by exploding stars and supernovas, but the types of elements ejected from the explosions are usually related to how big the star itself is. Smaller and younger stars generally spew carbon, oxygen, and other lighter metals, while heavier metals are generated by the oldest and largest stars. Iron is one of the last elements created by a massive star before its final explosion, meaning that not only were these iron-60 particles from a source outside of our solar system, but that they likely originated from a massive supernova explosion of a star dozens of times larger than our own sun, the dust of which finally came to rest on the surface of Antarctica. Researchers believe that since there have been no recent supernovas occurring in the recent past, the dust likely came from a region of space called the local interstellar cloud, or the local fluff, which spans about 30 light-years and currently surrounds the Earth's orbit. The local interstellar cloud consists of a collection of debris from the explosion of gases from other ancient exploding stars, some of which very well could be iron-60. The scientists are collecting deeper ice cores from Antarctica to perform further analysis, which they hope will shed some light into the mystery of where such a rare iron isotope came from. 430,000-year-old meteor explosion. Scientists who study asteroids, particularly those that entered the Earth's atmosphere thousands of years ago, have a rough time tracking the sediment. Fortunately, any asteroid that crosses Antarctica likely left a discernible trace, as the environment has been totally untouched and perfectly preserved for almost the entire history of the Earth. This was the case with an asteroid that plummeted to Earth 430,000 years ago, during the time that the first Neanderthals were beginning to expand across the globe. The asteroid never actually made contact with the surface of Antarctica, but instead exploded in the sky overhead in what is known as an airburst, leaving shrapnel, space rock, and intense damage to the Earth below. The location was lucky for two reasons. First, a similar explosion over a modern-day town would wipe the town off the map, and the isolated region of Antarctica meant that hundreds of thousands of years later, samples from this meteorite could be extracted and studied, which is exactly what researchers did. And what they found surprised them. The samples of the Arctic meteorite did not resemble samples taken from anywhere else in the world, as they were bonded together in strange, glob-like formations. These discoveries have allowed scientists to piece together what likely happened, and even though the event was hundreds of thousands of years ago, based on the samples taken, they believe that the asteroid could have been as large as 150 meters wide. Because of the strange formations of the samples, the meteor likely broke up relatively close to the ground, which allowed the fragments full of nickel and magnesium to react with the Arctic ice to form the odd shapes. Air bursts are even more damaging than asteroids that contact the Earth, because the explosion can destroy an exceptionally large surface area, while destruction from the latter is usually limited to the crater that it creates. This Arctic airburst likely affected up to 100,000 square kilometers of Antarctica, with temperatures reaching up to 5,000 degrees Celsius. The fact that puzzle pieces like this from space events that occurred before humans even walked the Earth shows just how far science has come. But what do you make of these discoveries that we have found on our Earth? A mysterious black goo was being found by Egyptologists, with them saying that it was used to cover mummies. Several mummies and artifacts were covered in this black goo, and after tests were carried out, researchers said they were able to trace it back to the 19th and 22nd dynasties. One mummy was found to be covered in this substance, with the archaeologists saying that the individual was a priest to the sun god Ammonius, and said that he passed away almost after this. He was placed into a large wooden coffin and had the black goo poured over him. Archaeologists had noticed that this substance was used on various mummies and also artifacts, and so they decided to conduct a variety of tests to find out more about it. The British Museum was able to find out more about this substance and what its exact purpose was. It's reported that researchers in the area were able to collect over 100 samples of this black goo, saying that some of these samples were vaporized in a process called gas chromatography. After this, they were placed through a tube which helped separate the molecules. Dr. Kate Fulcher, research assistant in the museum's Department of Scientific Research, said the following about the experiment. We discovered that the goo is made of a combination of plant oil, animal fats, tree resin, beeswax, and bitumen, which is a solid crude oil. The exact ingredients vary from one coffin to the next, but the goo was always made from some of these." End quote. Interestingly, she also said that there were other ingredients inside the black goo that they were unable to detect, saying that they were likely degraded to the point that they could no longer be picked up on. Archaeologists said this goo had been found in wooden figurines, large boxes that help bond them, and also coffins. Even Tutankhamun's tomb contained figurines that were covered in the black goo. But researchers said that as of right now, these have not been analyzed. One of the reasons this substance was created the way it was is because the ancient Egyptians thought the color black symbolizes rebirth. Dr. Kate Fulcher continued with the following. Osiris was called the Black One in various texts and is often depicted with black skin and in the guise of a mummified body. Black is also the color associated with the silk deposits on the bank of the River Nile, and this was after the annual flood receded. It could therefore be reasoned that the practice of coating coffins in black goo links the coffins to regeneration associated with Osiris. End quote. The archaeologists also noticed that the black goo helped to bond the coffins together, and one idea was that this was to stop robbers from being able to steal from the coffins. The researchers also said this substance wasn't plentiful, and only the elite of ancient Egypt and a few others would have been able to have access to it. Large amounts of it was found in King Tut's tomb, with scientists saying some of it went. The black goo has also been found in coffins from the Third Intermediate Period. But Dr. Folk just said that further excavations could reveal this goo as being used in different periods. A recent discovery made in Sudan also showed that the goo was present in this region, and this was because it was under Egyptian control. Not only does this show that there were elite members living in this region, but it's also direct evidence that the ancient Egyptians had established a trade route with them. Archaeologists have known for some time now that the ancient Egyptians were advanced in many ways, and one discovery that proved this was that of a 3,000-year-old wooden toe prosthetic. In a graveyard hill west of Luxor, Egypt, a one-of-a-kind discovery was made when researchers found a 3,000-year-old prosthetic that belonged to a female mummy. It dates back to the early Iron Age, or more than 2,600 years ago. Scientists are astounded by the design and accuracy of the wooden prosthetic toe, considering that modern medical technologies such as X-ray and computer imaging weren't available during this time. This discovery further proves the high intellectual capabilities of ancient Egyptians and shows us the injuries such as losing a toe were attended to. Scientists from the University of Manchester, led by Dr. Jackie Finch, have studied the ancient toe prosthesis and found that outside from wood, it also has leather materials and a hinge. A belt strapper fixes the device to the foot, causing little to no discomfort to the wearer. The artistry of the design is highly evident with the aesthetic of the prosthesis, that it even features a carved-out toenail. Dr. Finch built highly. He invited 2 volunteers to test whether the prosthetic toe had indeed helped their own improve the quality of their life. According to the volunteers, they didn't have any trouble walking, and it looks natural, especially when worn with Egyptian sandals. Based on how this handmade device fits the wearer, researchers determined that the wooden toe had been refitted and adjusted several times over the wearer's life to make sure that it looks and feels as comfortable and as natural as possible. The wearer of the wooden prosthesis is known to be a wealthy daughter of a priest. Researchers believe that she may have lost her toe due to complications with diabetes. The mummy was located in an older burial chapel, a place that is known to have been home for upper-class people with ties to the reigning royal family. The wearer's social status and wealth have afforded her one of the best ancient medical technologies ever discovered. The invention and exploration of prosthesis in medicine did not happen until the Dark Ages, when tradesmen started to sell artificial limbs to knights who had lost body parts during combat. These discoveries have shown us some of the wonders of the ancient Egyptian world, and that even to this day, scientists are still finding astounding artifacts that prove how advanced their way of life was, even in the absence of modern technology. This also teaches the world that one thing our civilization has in common with early Egyptians is our desire to overcome hardships. So what do you make of these interesting discoveries? At high altitudes with low oxygen and freezing temperatures, mountains are without a doubt one of our planet's harshest climates. Mount Everest, the world's highest peak, has reported temperatures as low as -66 degrees Celsius, and harbors an estimated 150 bodies of climbers who succumbed to these brutal elements. On the other hand, the very same hostile environments that make survival difficult serve as the ideal conditions for preservation. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 mountaintop discoveries. Museum unveils a frozen maiden. In 1999, archaeologists in Argentina discovered the mummified remains of a 15-year-old Incan girl, now known as the Maiden or La Doncella, on the summit of Mount Uyayaco, a volcano on the Chilean border. The young woman, who is believed to have lived around 500 years ago, was so well preserved due to the thin, dry mountain air that her organs were found to be completely intact, and blood was found to still be present in her heart and lungs. Scientists were even able to analyze the contents of her stomach and recognize a bacterial infection in her lung using a new forensic technique in which they analyzed tissue proteins rather than DNA. Her skin and facial features remain almost completely unblemished to the point that she appears as if she is still alive and just sleeping. The remarkable young woman was found in the modern-day province of Salta alongside 2 other children nicknamed the Boy, El Nino, and the Girl of Lightning, La Niña del Rio. They are collectively known as Los Ninos or the Children, and they are believed to have all been part of the same sacrificial ceremony as once performed by the Incan people. These ceremonies, traditionally called capicatia, were used to mark important events such as or as an attempt to appease the gods in times of trouble, such as during a drought or famine. Typically healthy, well-cared-for peasant children were chosen for such ceremonies, which was considered an honor. The selected children were then fattened up in the months leading up to the ceremony. They were fed maize and animal proteins, foods usually reserved for the well-off and the elite as opposed to their standard diet of mostly potatoes. The contents of her stomach confirmed this shift in her diet. During the ceremony itself, the children were marched hundreds of miles to and from Cusco, the Incan capital. Feasts and mini-celebrations were held in their honor up until the day they were led by Incan high priests to the mountaintops to meet their ultimate fate. The children were made to hike to the peak alongside the clergyman. An incredibly strenuous and grueling task, they were often given stimulant leaves in order to guarantee their safe and timely arrival. Once at the burial site, the children were then given drinks of ethanol, likely chica, or maize beer to calm their nerves. They were then attacked or repeatedly hit and left to freeze on the icy peaks. Forensic tests on the maiden's hair suggest that she began her use of stimulant leaves 1 year before her loss of life, probably around the time she was selected as a sacrifice, and that her use of alcohol increased greatly in the last few weeks of her life, possibly due to nerves, but more likely due to her participation in all the smaller celebrations leading up to the final ceremony. Fear of deterioration kept La Doncella from being displayed for some time after her discovery, as archaeologists worried that she would quickly fall apart after being removed from the summit. Today she is on display at the Museum of High-Altitude Archaeology in a triple-pane glass case, with a computerized climate control system meant to mimic those perfect mountain conditions that kept her so perfectly preserved for hundreds of years prior to her discovery. A 1,200-year-old Viking sword discovered on Norwegian mountain. From the late 8th century until the early 11th century, the Vikings ruled the seas with fear and acts of violence. During this period of the Middle Ages, these sea-traveling warriors exercised their widespread command by trading, colonizing, and raiding countless civilizations across the European continent and venturing as far as Asia and even North America. When they crossed the Atlantic 5 centuries before Columbus. During their 250-year command of the sea, these Norsemen established themselves as a historically significant civilization, leaving behind many artifacts unique to them as a people, such as fragments of a rudimentary sled and snowshoes made for pack horses. These relics give us insight into the daily lives of a society long lost but not forgotten. In 2017, a small group of men hunting reindeer in the mountains of Oppland County, central Norway, made one of history's most remarkable archaeological discoveries in regards to this fascinating people. Wedged between 2 rocks, the hunters found a rusted, though well-preserved Viking sword likely to have originated between 85 and 950 AD. It is one of many new discoveries found in connection with the new improvements being done to Norway's E39 highway. And, according to a Norwegian glacial archaeology organization, secrets of the ice a result of global warming melting a once completely frozen terrain. Though estimated to be thousands of years old, the sword's remarkable condition can most likely be attributed to the low pressure and extreme cold of the mountaintop, both of which likely prevented further rusting or degradation. Its handle, which was likely organic, made of bone, wood, or leather as tradition held, did not survive the centuries, as well as the blade itself, which is, by all accounts, heavier than expected and extraordinarily robust. Science cannot, however, determine how the sword ended up on the lonely mountaintop. The surrounding area was scoured for related artifacts, but archaeologists came up bare. It likely belonged to Viking swordsmen, but how or why he ended up alone, so far from civilization, is up for speculation. It is theorized that he was separated from a group during a snowstorm in which he perished, only to be dragged away by local wildlife, leaving behind only his sword to tell his story. Kolyma woolly mammoth. Before modern-day humans or Homo sapiens came a series of archaic humans of the same genus. They first spread throughout Afro-Eurasia during the earlier Pleistocene era, commonly known as the Ice Age. Later in this same era began the spread of early modern humans throughout the rest of the continents. It is during this late Pleistocene era that their final discovery on our list originated. In 2007, in a gold mine in the Kolyma Mountains in northeastern Siberia, a nearly complete mummified woolly rhinoceros was discovered frozen on the southern stretch of the Kolyma River. The animal was found to be female and believed to have fallen in the icy river at 3 or 4 years of age. The animal, which was dated using a rib fragment and a method of a radiocarbon dating method called accelerator mass spectrometry, was found to be an impressive 39,000 years old. The mummified remains were incredibly well kept, boasting a nearly complete left side, including a thick, gray skin, covered in brown fur across its still intact face and complete left ear. The creature's skull was found to be whole with its jaw still attached, along with the 2 horns atop its snout, which give the creature an appearance reminiscent to that of the modern-day rhinoceros. Both fore and hind legs remained attached, as well as its brown fur-covered tail. Based on its sheer size, archaeologists estimate the rhinoceros to have weighed 1.5 tons at the time of its passing. Most of the animal's internal organs were lost to time, though its intestines and stomach, along with its contents, remain, giving archaeologists a glimpse into the mega-herbivore's diet. Scientists concluded the rhinos lived mostly from grasses and sagebrush commonly found in the Siberia tundra. Although the spread of early humans across the planet and into their natural habitat was originally thought to be the cause of the species' demise, scientists now theorize that this megafauna, whose DNA revealed genetic mutations catered to cold weather adaptation, ultimately succumbed to a drastic change in climate when temperatures rose too high for the Ice Age species to tolerate. But what do you make of these 3 interesting discoveries hidden in the ice? Was the last time you discovered something? What was it that you found? Not all discoveries are necessarily important or interesting, but for hundreds of years mankind has loved to explore. The thrill of finding something is quite a feeling, even if it is not anything of note. Yet the simple intrigue that surrounds discovered items is enough to get our minds racing. Where do these things come from and what are their stories? Every once in a while, however, rather more fantastical discoveries are made. Not all of them particularly pleasant and some even a little sinister. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 chilling and mysterious stories. Melting glaciers in northern Italy reveal 2 soldiers. From 1914 to 1918, the world was engulfed in battles, a conflict that ravaged nations and toppled empires. The sheer scale of destruction experienced during those years altered history, changing power balances across the globe and resulting in a monumental loss of life. In some ways, the effects of that era are still felt today, with remnants of the chaos appearing in the past. In the most unexpected places, leaving a stain on many of the most jaw-droppingly beautiful places you could visit. Such a thing occurred a few years ago in the alpine ski town of Piero. This tourist haven is nestled in mountainous northern Italy, and if you can look past its various pleasurable amenities and picturesque hiking trails, you will quickly realize there is more to this town than meets the eye. Due to ever-increasing temperatures, the thick sheets of ice that make up the glaciers surrounding the mountains have started to melt, spilling their secrets out in the process. In 2014, on the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the Great War, the pristinely preserved corpses of 2 World War I Italian soldiers were found among the melting ice. The obscurity of their mummified remains was explained by the fact that the town was at the center of a violent episode at that time. This conflict was primarily a battlefront in the snowy terrain of the Alps between the 2 opposing sides of Italy, who were then part of the Allies, and Austria, who was part of the Central Powers. Due to the unforgiving geography of the area, the style of battle was different to that experienced at sea level. Specialized soldiers were utilized on both sides, with the Italian Alpine warriors aptly named Alpini and their Austrian counterparts known as the Kaiserschützen. Both sides had to endure the ferocious cold and work around the tricky geography, using a system of cable cars, all whilst under the imminent threat of spontaneous avalanches and storms. The 2 soldiers in question, upon further examination, are believed to have been 2 Austrian boys on the cusp of adulthood aged 17 and 18, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Each had a hole in their skull which only serves as a chilling testament to the brutality of the situation at the time. This occurrence is not an isolated incident, however, with many more remnants of the carnage appearing throughout the Central European region as the once icy regions turn to water due to rising temperatures. There is no doubt that more discoveries are yet to come to light, with each one providing a harrowing insight into the effects of our past. Witch prison. The early modern period spanned 300 years from the 15th to the 18th century and hosted some of Britain's most infamous historical events. One such event, sparked by devout Christian beliefs and the ideologies of the kings, had a particularly tight grip over the country, culminating in the taking of lives of thousands of women across the world. If you have not guessed it by now, we are talking about the mass hysteria surrounding remains of the craze can still be found. In 2016, historians uncovered a supposed witch prison in a 15th century chapel in Aberdeen, Scotland. Researchers' suspicions were aroused upon spotting an iron ring set in a stone pillar in the north wall of the chapel. They believed that this was a telling sign that the building had a more sinister history than previously thought. Upon further scrutiny of the city's archives, researchers learned some shocking revelations relating to the chapel's role in the imprisonment and capital punishment of witches. The chapel served as a holding cell for witches who had already been found guilty. As such, it was the last place they were likely to ever see before they were taken to their end. These individuals were burnt at the stake. This discovery only adds to the mounting evidence that Aberdeen was host to a particularly fierce bout of hysteria during the Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1597. Sparked by the book Demonology written by King James VI of Scotland and combined with his overzealous laws against witchcraft, a mass witch hunt engulfed the Scottish Highlands, resulting in some 400 people going on trial accused of witchcraft, with about 200 being punished and having their lives taken from them after being branded as witches. 24 of these capital punishments occurred in Aberdeen, a significant concentration considering the rurality of the population at the time. Contrary to popular belief, witch hunts did not consist of enraged members of the local community armed to the teeth with pitchforks and crossbows marching through the village. In fact, there were slick operations conducted by seasoned officials appointed by the king himself. This explains why there were such detailed records for the historians to draw upon during their research in the first place. With that said, not every place managed to keep such pristine and orderly records like Aberdeen. So it is down to the historians and archaeologists to uncover more evidence that can serve to improve our understanding of the hazy events at that time. The true toll of the witch hunts across Europe occurring in the early modern period are still in dispute, with estimates ranging from the 10,000s all the way up to 7-digit figures. The human book reading has served as an often undervalued yet pleasurable pastime for millions of people. Books have been handed down through generations, passing on their magic and wisdom for all kinds of people to enjoy. In academia, books provide the basis of research and knowledge. From journals to stories to accounts and chronicles, books are distinctly unique in the information they can provide. Bookkeeping is considered an art by some, with especially old manuscripts and copies often bound very delicately. Sometimes the material the book is made out of, often leather and hide in older times, is more valuable than the content itself. But a long time ago, the art of bookbinding was a little more macabre. De Destiny del Home, which translates to Destinies of the Soul, has been housed at the Houghton Library at Harvard University since the early 1900s. The book was apparently gifted to a friend of Arsène's, a doctor named Ludovic Boulin. Dr. Boulin was a rather strange man, but like many professionals in his field during the Age of Empire, medicine was an area of research where many ghastly experiments were carried out. Boulin being given the book is not particularly impressive when isolated, but it is what he did with the book that is truly shocking. He bound the book in human skin. Thought to be taken from a young woman who had passed away in his care, Boulin placed a note within the front cover reading, "I had kept this piece of human skin taken from the back of a woman." A book about the human soul deserved to have a human covering. For reference, the book is meant to be an investigative fantasy depiction of what happens to the soul once passed. Whilst the act seems particularly grim, binding books with skin is not quite as uncommon as some may believe. At least it was not a few hundred years ago. One of the most famous examples of skin binding is that of William Burke. Burke, the Scottish man who took the lives of 16 people in the 19th century, has been immortalized rather morbidly in the cover of a small pocketbook, although how bookmakers actually got hold of his body is a misunderstood story. Some discoveries, especially those made in books, are astonishing, but none perhaps for reasons quite so dark. From witches to books to melting glaciers, our world is full of mysteries just waiting to be unearthed. Who knows, you could be the next person to stumble across something truly bizarre. But what do you make of these chilling discoveries and the stories behind them? For years now, Antarctica has been shrouded in mystery. Antarctica is not owned by one nation, but various different researchers and scientists call this place home. And over the years, installations have allowed them to carry out their research in the area, many of which have led to teams making fascinating discoveries. Antarctica is also known among certain groups as being a place that has many strange mysteries. For example, in recent years, people using Google Earth have claimed that many strange artifacts can be found across the continent, some of which include giant pyramids, large underwater structures, which some say is proof of ancient civilizations, and also giant structures that appear to resemble modern-day recreations of unidentified flying objects, with many of them being in the shape of a disk. It's important to note, though, that scientists and researchers don't accept these theories and say that nothing strange is going on down in Antarctica. One of the most recent discoveries to be shared online is that of a giant object seen in the snow, with one person saying that it looks like a giant robot. The idea of there being a large 20-meter-tall robot in Antarctica has split people, with some saying that different programs are happening right now in Antarctica and that people have no idea that these are going on, while others said that it's unlikely that this is what we're looking at, and say that the melting ice around this rock just makes it look like it's in the shape of a humanoid. Regardless, amateur researchers have said that for years now whispers of secret programs being conducted in the region have been leaked online, with some of these leaks reporting that officials have found ancient technology, large structures, and even unidentified flying objects. One person using Google Earth was able to measure this structure and said that it comes in at 20 meters. One believer said the following about the discovery. Let's just say, for instance, that this is real. What better place to build a giant robot than Antarctica? It's the perfect place to do this, as no one would know this was happening. I know some have said that these government installations are put here so they're out of the way of the general public. And this makes sense, as it would allow them to conduct research without anyone knowing. End quote. Some, though, disagreed with this statement and said that although they believe that strange things are happening down in Antarctica, they think this one is a bit of a reach. As mentioned before, though, one of the most interesting discoveries that's often shared around is that of large crafts seen beneath the ice, with some saying that due to melting ice and glaciers, some of these unidentified crafts are now being exposed. Although megalithic structures found poking out of the ice might be hard to explain, perhaps a more mysterious discovery for researchers is that of the supposed findings of unidentified flying objects, which can allegedly be found all across the Antarctic continent, and that have been sighted via the use of satellite surveillance. First found by internet theorists, online images have surfaced of flying saucer-like shapes hiding within the ice caves and remote areas across the Antarctic. Further satellite images can also be seen of large outcroppings that many theorists have speculated are possible crashed spaceships, of which can be seen casting large shadows. Enthusiasts have also said that government officials have found evidence of these trapped unidentified flying objects deep within the glacial formations, that they're trapped there waiting to be uncovered by research teams stationed on the southern continent. Various UFO sites have claimed that a UFO crashed into the Antarctic snow, and that it can be seen surrounded by tanks. When the photographs were shared, people started to give their opinions on what they thought the object was. Some claim that the object in the snow is different to the tanks that can be seen next to it, and that it does look like the tanks were sent there to investigate what was going on. The object looks to be disc in shape, and one thing that's confused those who have seen the images is the presence of these tanks, with some saying that if the tanks weren't there, this could be ruled out as perhaps a piece of snow or ice, but due to them being there, it adds an air of mystery. Some went on to say that at the end of the skid you can see an unidentified object, and that again this does look to be disc in shape. For years there's been rumors that UFOs have been discovered embedded in the ice at Antarctica, and that this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of activity going on down there. UFO researchers have gone on to say that the high military presence here comes down to there being a lot of UFO sightings in this area, saying that bases were built here purely to investigate these sorts of claims. As of right now, though, the government has never admitted to finding UFOs in Antarctica and say that any claims of there being UFOs in this region is just stories. When people zoomed in on the supposed tanks, though, some noted that you couldn't see any tracks in the snow and said that due to their weight you should be able to see tracks. However, some UFO researchers hit back at these claims and said that a small snowstorm would easily cover them up, saying it would only take a few hours for the tracks to be hidden underneath a new batch of snow. One UFO researcher said the following about the object. I think that it measures at least 200 feet in diameter. It could be even more looking at it compared to the tanks. There's a reason why those tanks are there, and I think that they're collecting this UFO. We've heard many stories about governments being interested in these crafts, and I think this is one of those cases where we're seeing a real down UFO. So what do you make of this discovery? Do you think it shows a giant robot? Or is this just melting ice in the shape of a humanoid? Have you ever looked at the moon and thought, well, how did that get there? Our guess is probably not. Well, what you may be surprised to hear is that our scientists of the past and present do not currently have a definitive answer. Man may have landed on the moon, but we are still not entirely certain how our satellite came to be. We will be diving into one moon theory that dates back 4.5 billion years ago that appears to have left several Everest-sized marks within the Earth's crust, to a sleeping walrus taking a ride. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 fascinating discoveries from Earth, space, and sea. The Earth is crumbling in West Texas. Everything is bigger in Texas. The saying is a big part of Texas pride, and they will not be shy to let you know that the food, the music, the cowboy hats, and the state itself is bigger and better than anywhere else in the country. There is, however, something big happening in the state that Texans are not talking about, and it keeps getting bigger. While it might surprise some Texans to know that there are 2 massive holes in the West Texas desert, the people of Winkler County are all too familiar with the sinkholes, nicknamed Wink Sinks, threatening their country's surrounding area. The first hole appeared in 1980. In less than 24 hours, the sinkhole grew to be over 33.5 meters deep and over 33 meters wide. The The sinkhole shows no signs of slowing down as it has continued to expand year over year. The county experienced its second sinkhole only a mile away from the first. Today, Wink Sink 1 measures over 170 meters across, and the Wink Sink 2 has grown over 109 meters, making it the length of an American football field. Researchers from the Southern Methodist University have studied the area surrounding the sinkhole, and the data shows the terrain is becoming increasingly unstable. Over the last decade, several studies including images captured by orbiting satellites show that while the sinkholes continue to expand, the landscape around them is subsiding as well. With every year, the two sinkholes grow in size, effectively closing the 1-mile gap between them. It is also entirely possible for new sinkholes to form in the area. Based on the compiled data, it is no longer a matter of if it will happen, but when. A collapse of this magnitude would be catastrophic to the surrounding area. Scientists Kinwoo Kim and Zhong Liu of SMU speculate that decades of drilling for gas and oil in the area may be to blame for the alarmingly unstable landscape. The introduction of fresh water into the underground can dissolve the Earth's salt layers, causing the terrain above and around them to collapse. While oil and gas extraction are a possible cause, fresh water below the surface is also a naturally occurring phenomenon, so it is difficult to say with certainty if they are to blame for these two wink sinks. While much of Texas is seemingly unaware of this inevitable outcome, the people of Wink and Kermit, the two towns in the area, are seemingly unbothered by the entire situation. When journalists from the Texas Tribune reached out for comment back in 2016, local Sheriff George Keithley was not worried in the slightest. "We don't lose sleep over it. While the closest sinkhole is still a mile away from the nearest town, it does not directly threaten the locals." The more significant issue is that the surrounding area is densely populated with equipment used for oil and gas production in addition to pipelines containing hazardous liquid. They may not be in direct danger, but they are in for quite a mess should the sinkholes converge or new ones emerge. Arctic walrus takes a nap on an iceberg, wakes up in Ireland. Our next story features an unexpected visitor on the coast of Ireland. Maren Houlihan and her father were taking a walk along Glanlam Beach on Valentia Island on March 14th, when they spotted what they assumed was a seal. It was only once they noticed the tusks that they realized they were looking at a young male walrus. As puzzled as they were to see a walrus on the coast of Ireland, they explained that the animal seemed equally shocked with its present location. Kevin Flannery, marine biologist and director of the Dingle Ocean World Aquarium, explained that the walrus likely fell asleep on a piece of an iceberg off the Greenland ice sheet and drifted off across the ocean. When the walrus woke up from its nap in the middle of the sea and did not recognize its, Flannery noticed that the walrus appeared to have little body fat, suggesting that he might have had to swim for hundreds of miles before finally finding land. Flannery told the Irish Times that it is very unusual to spot a walrus in their parts of the world. While there have been previously reported sightings in the towns of Shannon and Mayo in the late 1980s and 90s, this has been the first confirmed sighting since October 1930. The young walrus is not the only animal to wander so far from home. In 2019, a polar bear was found roaming the suburbs of Siberia, Russia, over 300 miles from home. In both of these instances, it calls to question how many more sightings of this kind will happen with the rapid melting of the Greenland ice sheet, causing several species to travel hundreds of miles to find food. Mysterious blobs of dense rock hundreds of miles tall sits deep inside our Earth. Our final discovery is a mystery whose origin has yet to be fully explained. Deep beneath the Earth's crust are two massive blobs of rock that resemble a pair of hands cupping the Earth's core. The word massive is an understatement as these formations spread thousands of miles in either of the Earth's 1,800-mile deep mantle. Geologists have spent the last 4 decades trying to determine the source of these gigantic continent-sized formations that have been discovered under Africa and the Pacific Ocean. While some experts have suggested that these are tectonic plate fragments trapped beneath each other, new research points to an otherworldly explanation instead. Yuan, a PhD student from Arizona State University, suggested that the blobs are the remains of a planetary embryo the size of Mars, named Theia, that collided with the Earth in its early infancy 4.5 billion years ago. Yuan theorizes that Theia's mantle could have been several percent denser than Earth's. This theory would explain how it would have been possible for Theia's mantle to sink through the planet's lowermost mantle and surround our planet's core. In 2019, while studying the plumes of hot rock and magma from some Samoan and Icelandic volcanoes, scientists were able to identify several elements that date back 4.5 billion years ago, the time when Theia is suggested to have glided with Earth. While this data does support the collision theory, there is still not enough resounding scientific evidence to support it fully. The resulting impact is also the most popular theory to date about the origins of our moon. The collision would have caused the Earth's surface to explode into a sea of raging magma, shooting planetary debris out into space that would later form our only permanent natural satellite. Another interesting theory is that when the two primordial worlds collided, their cores fused into a single core, potentially releasing the chemicals needed to support life on our planet. It has also been suggested that these blobs are so massively dense that they contribute magnetic field. While the planetary collision is the most popular hypothesis explaining the origins of our moon and the blobs cradling the Earth's core, scientists have still yet to find enough concrete evidence of their existence. But what do you make of our planet's endless fascinating discoveries? Stories revolving around ancient humans can be just as scary as they are interesting. However, what is modern life without a little bit of curiosity? Every day, scientists are making new discoveries that challenge us to rethink our perspectives and what we really know. What you are about to hear today might just change how you view the world for good. Who knows, perhaps one day these mysteries might just rewrite the status quo of human history. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we will be taking a look at 3 interesting discoveries from around the world. Rethinking the Neanderthal cave in France. When you think about a Neanderthal, what first comes to your mind? Perhaps an ancient and unintelligent human? Well, you might want to think the latter part. Deep underground, scientists were able to discover some dark caves in France's Avon Valley. However, they were not just any regular caves. They were man-made structures over 176,000 years old, which was about 150,000 years older than any structure that had been uncovered before. That could only mean one thing: they were built by none other than the Neanderthal. This fascinating discovery changes the entire way that we see these ancient hominids. Whereas we previously associated them more closely with primates than humans, it turns out that they might be closer to us than we expected. But just how was it determined that Neanderthals were capable of building such caves? It all started in 1990 when explorer Bruno Kalszewski squeezed through a tunnel to arrive at the Brunacle Cave. After crossing animal bones and water pools in their path, he finally stumbled upon a startling scene of crushed-up stalagmites that were arranged into 2 ring shapes. All around these rings were indications of burnt bones. Immediately, he suspected that this was not naturally occurring. But when did this exactly take place? The carbon dating of a burnt bare bone revealed that it was about 47,600 years ago, which made it older than any discovered cave painting. Though it seemed impossible, that put it right in the age of the Neanderthal. To further prove this, another cave lover named Sophie Verheyden decided to uranium date the stalagmites. It turns out that the stalagmites were crushed up by people more than 176,000 years ago, which was further back than anyone had anticipated. While it was never determined what these Neanderthals were trying to do, it was evident that they used fire, were capable of building things, and most likely had tools by their side. Suddenly they might look a lot more familiar and less unintelligent than before. Perhaps humans were never so different from the humble Neanderthal. Italian witch burial in Italy. Anyone who knows history knows that witches were not particularly favored back in the ancient days. Even though people dress up as witches with costumes in the modern era, they were taken seriously back then with fatal consequences. Take this recent discovery, for instance, where archaeologists had uncovered the 800-year-old remains of a witch that was buried back in the Middle Ages. What they first noticed about the skeleton was that 7 nails were lodged into the victim's jawbone. Soon, the scientists found themselves situated in a witch's graveyard. Another skeleton nearby was found surrounded by 17 dice, which was a game that no women were allowed to play during those ages. It does not help the situation that the number 17 was considered unlucky in Italy as well. Those bone-chilling circumstances suggest she lost her life on the spot. On top of that, these women were young, around 25 to 30 years old. Despite their age, their bodies were not placed in any coffins or shrouds near the town of Piombino in Italy's Tuscany region. The situation in which they were found gives rise to the idea that they were accused of witchcraft. Though one woman's remains already had nails through her jaw, additional nails were found on her clothes, which pinned her to the ground. This was perhaps due to local fears that she would somehow use her evil powers to rise up from her and haunt the town. In an attempt to cure these women of their witchcraft or somehow cleanse them, the way they were buried indicates that rituals were performed on them. Yet one lingering question remains: if these women supposedly had evil powers, why were they buried in consecrated Christian ground? Above the peasant class, so influence was able to gain them their last resting spots on holy ground. However, even though their bodies were laid to rest, it is easy to imagine how restless their souls were moments before their last breath. Hundreds of innocent women who were caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time had their lives cut short due to bad luck, and the fate of these two women was not any different. Medieval drilled skull in today's world. Anyone with a disability can get access to treatment and support to help them in their challenges. However, this was not the same in the ancient days. To those in the Middle Ages, anyone with a deformity of sorts was suspected to be evil and plagued by spirits. This was no more apparent than the case of the medieval male skeleton that was found in the English countryside. His lower jaw on the left side had been deformed before his bones could fully fuse as a child. That in turn would distort his face, which might have been scary looking to any people he encountered. Accused of harboring evil spirits, the man with the facial deformity likely passed away in his 30s and was buried without his right hand or several foot bones. In the case of the missing limbs, it was most likely due to several visits grave robbers took to his remains. However, the most notable thing about his skeleton was that his skull had been trepaned, in other words drilled through, perhaps to relieve his pain or to exorcise the bad spirits. Thankfully, he survived and his bone area had healed, but that did little to fully relieve his community that he was entirely pure. In the end, he was buried in a lonely place without a coffin, was buried face down, and even had stones pressed on top of his body, despite the dirt covering him from above. Most likely the townspeople wanted to ensure that he never rose from the grave and that all his evil troubles were kept as far away as possible. Due to this treatment, it is easy to wonder what type of life this man might have led. Perhaps it is even more intriguing to wonder how such a drilling procedure would have taken place back in the Middle Ages. No matter what strikes your curiosity about this case, there is no doubt about it that it is full of mystery and wonder. At the end of the day, only one thing is for sure. People in the Middle Ages were obsessed with witches and evil spirits. But what do you make of these discoveries that have been unearthed? With the Earth's population constantly expanding and extending into even the most remote regions of the planet, it can be hard to imagine that people could disappear entirely off the face of the Earth, never to be seen again. It is even harder to imagine that sometimes those individuals who have mysteriously vanished might one day just suddenly re-enter society as though they never left. And yet, as strange as it sounds, this occurs more frequently than one might think. So today, we will be diving into 3 cases where individuals appeared to vanish from the face of the earth, only to reappear years later. Ho Van Ton, the man who spent 41 years in the jungle. In 1972, the country of Vietnam was still heavily involved in the Vietnam conflict and had been for decades. Ho Van Ton was a North Vietnamese soldier who was stationed in his hometown of the Tay Tra district of Quang Nai, when a bomb landed on his home and took the lives of his mother and 2 of his sons. Panicked and only thinking of survival, he took his surviving 1-year-old son and disappeared into the surrounding jungle. And as far as most people knew, Neither individual was ever seen or heard from again and was presumed a tragic accident. But in reality, Tan and his son Ho Vang Lan were not only still alive, but they had made lives for themselves deep in the heart of the jungle. They learned to survive without any modern conveniences or tools, and stayed hidden in until their shocking emergence in 2013. Lang grew up in total isolation with only his father for company, and as a result did not even fully comprehend that other people existed, and certainly did not understand how modern civilization worked. The two men built an elevated treehouse deep in the jungle out of trees and branches that they chopped down and wove together. They ate rats, mice, and whatever fruit they could scavenge in the forest, and planted corn throughout the small clearing that they had made in their home. Although deforestation causing the rapid shrinking of the Vietnamese jungle meant that every now and then the two men would be glimpsed by farmers and foragers, they remained hidden deep enough in the jungle that they were never discovered. However, one man did know of their location. Tan's son, Ho Van Tre, had survived the bomb that had destroyed the rest of his family and went searching for his father and brother in the jungle. Although he found them years after the Vietnam conflict was over, Tan did not recognize Tre as his son and refused to believe that it was safe to re-enter society. He preferred instead to live with Lang in the depths of the forest and even tucked the supplies of salt, kerosene and knives that Tre brought into the depths of their hut where they remained untouched. Tan and Lang continued in this fashion for decades, surviving off of the land, and until one day foragers venturing deep into the jungle found the two men and called local authorities, who convinced the men to return from the forest. It had been 41 years since they had last been exposed to civilization, and Tan was 81 years old. After being coaxed out of their jungle homes, the government provided a house for the two men, since Tan was a veteran of the conflict. However, the two men were never able to fully readjust to living amongst other humans, and then remained convinced that the forest was the only safe place, often returning to its depths for hours or days at a time. Lang eventually moved out of the house in the village and into a small house on the outskirts of the jungle, where he could farm rice and be close to the trees that had been his home and protection for his entire life. Gabriel Nagy. Sometimes people go missing and are never seen or heard from again, leaving their families to conclude, after years of waiting, that they must have met some unfortunate end. This appeared to be the case with Gabriel Nagy, who disappeared from Sydney, Australia one afternoon in 1987. A devoted husband and father to two children, Nagy was an incredibly hard worker who supported his family by working successful construction jobs while attending accounting classes on that fateful day. Nagy had spent the morning running errands in town and called his wife Pamela to let her know that he was on his way home for lunch. Pamela got his lunch ready, but when he did not return after several hours, she became increasingly worried, and that worry turned into outright panic when Nagy's car was discovered on the side of the road. The car was burned and Gabriel was nowhere to be found. His distraught family was left to wonder what had happened and where their father and husband 2 weeks after his car was found. Nagy withdrew money from a bank in Newcastle, almost 100 miles from Sydney, confirming that he was out there somewhere and still alive. However, no other clues or leads turned up for over 2 decades, and his family had long ago lost hope that they would ever see him again. Finally, during preparations to declare Nagy officially dead after being missing for so long, a police officer combing public records one final time noticed that a man of the same name who also went by Ron Saunders had appeared in medical records from a recent surgery. The officer traveled to the location of the surgery in a town called Mackay, almost 1,000 miles from Sydney, and tracked down Nagy at last. It turned out that he had developed dissociative fugue as a result of the crash, resulting in retrograde amnesia that caused him to forget about his life prior to the accident. With no idea who he was, spent the intervening years mostly homeless, wandering from city to city. He called himself Ron Saunders because he had seen a sign for Saunders Beach during his wanderings and, not knowing his real name, thought that it sounded nice. After his discovery, as he read letters and saw pictures from before his accident, his memory slowly began to return in hazy pieces and he was reunited with his family. Although he and his wife and children still live separately, His family is all supportive of Nagi as he navigates this new life that he was unaware that he even had and begins to rebuild the relationships with those who had believed him dead for 20 years. Amber Smith, 2-year-old, disappeared. Sometimes people who disappear without a trace turn up years or decades later, while other times it is only a matter of days or hours. However, for Dale and Diane Smith, whose daughter Amber was missing for about 24 hours, those hours seemed interminable. In early October 2013, Dale was at their home in Newaygo County, Michigan with Amber, when he stepped into another room for mere minutes and upon returning was alarmed to find that Amber was nowhere to be found. It appeared that she had simply wandered out of the house, but initial searches yielded no sign of the 2-year-old. As the day turned into night with still no sign of Amber, the Smiths grew even more frantic to find their missing daughter, as she had last been seen wearing only a tank top and shorts, and the temperatures were already rapidly plummeting to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The town rallied a large group composed of over 300 people that spent hours combing through the dense woods near the family home, but to no avail. Authorities that were called in to assist even used search and rescue dogs to attempt to follow her trail and sent helicopters to conduct an aerial search of the woods. However, both the police and the civilian groups were unable to find any clues as to where the child might have gone and did not even know whether she was still wandering around somewhere nearby, or if she had been taken by a passing stranger. As the hours passed with no trace of the girl, authorities began to be seriously concerned about the likelihood of finding Amber alive. The Newaygo County Undersheriff Brian Boyd even gave a press conference saying that the lack of clues was very suspicious, and an Amber Alert was immediately issued to notify authorities and civilians in neighboring towns in case she had been abducted. But even the Amber Alert turned up nothing, and with the masses of people searching fruitlessly for her, it truly seemed that she had vanished from the streets of Michigan. However, at around 2 p.m. the next day, as the 24-hour mark of Amber's disappearance approached, she was found on the edge of a 2-lane road almost 2 miles from her house. She was immediately transported to the local hospital, but aside from minor scrapes and bruises, appeared totally unharmed. Authorities and her parents were immensely relieved at the outcome, but were astonished by the fact that such a young girl was able to survive overnight in such dense woods and emerge untouched so far from her home. Amber was unable to say what had happened to her that night as she was too young to understand the questions. But thankfully, no matter how she managed to survive the cold night, she was able to be safely reunited with her family. But what do you make of these mysterious stories? Yellowstone is one of the most popular national parks in the United States, coming in second just behind the Great Smoky Mountains. When you think of Yellowstone National Park, a few things might come to mind. Incredible scenery, the famous geyser that erupts several times a day, or the giant supervolcano that lurks beneath the park. One thing that might not come to mind, though, is mysterious humanoids. Yet people who have visited the national park have come forward with their sightings and encounters, saying that they're certain that what they saw was a creature that resembles a human, was covered in fur, and that stood between 7 and 9 feet tall. This creature closely matches that of a Bigfoot, and many people across the United States have said this creature is definitely genuine, but note that it tends to stay out of the way of humans. One of the problems with these types of reports is being able to back them up with evidence. Most people can't, as the majority of these encounters are rushed, leaving the individuals questioning what it was they just encountered. One person, though, was able to capture proof of an alleged Bigfoot inside Yellowstone National Park. Mr. Wilson said the following about the image. I'm an avid watcher of the Yellowstone National Park live cams. I've been fortunate enough to be able to visit these incredible locations many times over my life, and it's always been one of those places where I feel happiest. It's one of the most scenic and beautiful national parks we have, but due to my age and a few other problems, I'm not able to visit as much. In fact, I haven't been here in a while. Something I often do is watch the live cameras that are set up around the park, although I've never seen anything like this before. While watching the cam, I noticed this large-looking human off into the distance. Now bear in mind this image has been zoomed in quite a lot and there was no one else out there in that region. This thing is tall, and it's the main reason I was able to spot it. In other parts of the national park, I could see people off into the distance, and they looked tiny. This thing really stood out because of how tall it looked against the trees. I know that there have been reports of Bigfoot in and around Yellowstone National Park, and although I've always stayed pretty neutral on the topic, I have a close friend that's told me stories of when he counted in Yellowstone National Park and encountered something he couldn't explain. He is insistent that what he encountered while camping was that of a Bigfoot, and definitely wasn't something like a bison. I'm interested to hear what you think of this, so I've attached the photograph below. Again, I'm not claiming that this is a Bigfoot, but I can't see how it was a human. It stood out so much, and like I said, this creature is really tall against the nearby trees. I watched the live cams a lot, and this is the first time I've seen a humanoid as large and as wide as this. I'd like to think that I know the difference between a standard human and whatever this is. This is one of the few times that a photograph of Bigfoot in Yellowstone has been captured within the national park. As mentioned earlier, although there's various stories floating around about people's encounters with this creature, very few have been able to photograph what they saw. Bigfoot researchers have said that for years now people visiting the national park have been seeing large hairy creatures, and state that most of these encounters happened during the nighttime of campus. When skeptics have seen these types of images, though, they've said it's important to keep an open mind and say that there's a lot of wildlife within Yellowstone National Park, and have said that people could just be misidentifying everyday creatures as Bigfoot. Although this is true, and that it's important to conduct as much research as possible when looking into these sightings, there's only a certain number of things that can be put forward in order to explain what's been seen. Eyewitnesses who claim that they've seen Bigfoot within Yellowstone say that you can't mix up this creature with that of local wildlife, going on to say that there's no humanoid creature within this region, and certainly not one that's able to reach these kinds of heights. The Sasquatch creature seems to stand somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall. The creature is believed to have a total arm length of 120% the height of his body, similar to that of an ape-like creature with elongated forearms. Unlike an ape, however, the creature is believed to be bipedal. The bipedal nature of the creature most likely points to the theory of a working voice box, as the head would need to be in a position that allows for bipedal movement. Further evidence shows that the Sasquatch has a massive big toe to help with balancing issues, as it's nearly 3 times in volume in comparison to its size when adjusted for human scale. The Sasquatch is also seemingly covered in hair all over its body. For hundreds of years, mysterious reports have been made about large humanoids. Individuals have come forward with their encounters, and in some cases they even managed to photograph what they saw. However, even though they're seen by thousands of people yearly, scientists have said there's no such creatures, and what people are seeing is mundane things like everyday wildlife. Sightings of this beast have persisted for eons, since the time of the Aborigines and their ancient mythological folklore. What is all the more startling about these claims is that even in the modern day, people are still encountering these creatures. All across the globe, there's been reports of them, from Tibet, America, and even Australia. Although this is the case, people are still torn about what these creatures are, whether there is any substance to these sightings. So what do you make of this interesting image? Do you think it shows Bigfoot, a human, or is it something like a tree or perhaps even a wild animal? Anonymous are easily the most famous hackers out there, receiving the most media exposure and covering topics that relate to many people. Although they've been criticized, overall people agree with their own goals. Anonymous, a group of hackers and online activists, have been featured a lot in the mainstream media, not only for what they've discovered and published to the world, but because no one really knows who they are. One of the first founders of the organization went on Reddit and did an interview. One of the questions that was asked was, who is Anonymous, and what's their end goal? To which they responded with the following: Anonymous has all walks of life. The most infamous is obviously the hacker type, but just as important are the ones that mobilize online and spread awareness, do research and collaborate in that manner. If you have a voice, you can help Anonymous. When asked what future members of Anonymous will be tackling, he said the following: privacy rights, big data, and monolithic megacorporations owning everything about you and your life. In recent years, Anonymous has impacted many people's lives, and one of their most recent they've said that they plan to bring down Elon Musk for messing around with the price of cryptocurrencies, with some members of the group feeling like he's messing with people's livelihood. The group went on to say that Elon has too much power in the cryptocurrency world, and that they don't like how he's behaving. One recent tweet by Elon caught people's attention, as it had the Bitcoin logo with a broken heart emoji. Due to this tweet, it caused Bitcoin to drop by 7%. Crypto Twitter has been very vocal about the fact that when Elon tweets about things like Bitcoin, it usually has an effect on the wider audience. Many people in the comments section were vocal about why cryptocurrency is a bad thing, saying that one person shouldn't have the ability to cause this kind of decrease. One person said the following: Bitcoiners are losing their mind over this, and it makes me laugh that Elon is able to manipulate this system like this. I've never trusted cryptocurrency as I think it's unstable. Another person said the following: the fact that people like Elon have so much impact on these currencies is worrying. I read somewhere that these billionaires do this in order to drop prices, and they buy them all at a cheaper price, and then the prices go back to normal, but they've made a load of money because they buy them at a drop. End quote. Anonymous were direct in their response to this behavior, saying the following to Elon: millions of retail investors were really counting on their crypto gains to improve their lives. This is something that you will never understand, because you were born into stolen wealth of South African emerald mines and have no clue what struggle is like for most of the working people in the world. Of course, they took the risk upon themselves when they invested, and everyone knows to be prepared for vitality in crypto. But your tweets this week show a clear disregard for the average working person, as hardworking people have their dreams liquidated over your public temper tantrums. You continue to mock them with your memes from one of your multi-million-dollar mansions. For the past several years, you've enjoyed one of the most favorable reputations of anyone in the billionaire class, because you've tapped into a desire that many of us want, with electric cars and space exploration. But recently, your carefully created public images being exposed, and people are beginning to see you as nothing more than another narcissistic rich dude who is desperate for attention. It appears that your quest to save the world is more rooted in superiority and savior complex than it is an actual concern for humanity. This has been obvious to your employees for a long time, who have faced intolerable conditions under your command for years. It's also obvious that the young children working in your overseas Lithuanian mines, which are destroying the local environment as well. You've been open about your willingness to stage coups in order to install dictators, and this is in places where your toxic products are being mined. You've even prematurely crowned yourself as Emperor of Mars, a place where you will be sending people to die. You think you are the smartest person in the room, but now you've met your match. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. Expect us. The message got different reactions on social media, with some praising the group for coming forward and touching on an issue that many have said have impacted them, while others have said that if you don't want to get burned by cryptocurrency, then don't invest. One person commented that these people complaining are the same ones congratulating Elon when things go their way, saying that these types of people don't know how to ride the wave, and are the type of people to put all their savings in crypto then get annoyed when it dims. Anonymous continued with the following: Tesla has also made more money holding Bitcoin for a few months than they did in years of selling cars. It's also more likely that this Bitcoin was purchased with money from these government subsidies. It's now widely believed that you've been forced to denounce your company's involvement with Bitcoin in order to keep that green government money flowing into Tesla. The energy use argument about proof of working mining is a very shady conversation that requires a fairly complex understanding of how power grids work and how excess energy is wasted by power companies and sought help by crypto miners. End quote. So what do you make of this message? And do you think that Elon should be held accountable for his comments? It's been 33 years since the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, and the air is still heavily contaminated. To this day, nuclear fuel continues to smolder within its walls, but there are also some positive changes happening in Chernobyl. For example, new species of animals have migrated into the area and are thriving now humans have left it behind. The most recent news is that Chernobyl's nuclear fuel is smoldering again, and could explode. During the 1930s, physicists discovered that nuclear fusion could produce a huge amount of power. Primarily, these scientists worked on using this energy as an instrument for warfare and created a devastating device. This project was funded by the U.S. government and would be used during the 1940s as part of the conflict against Japan. On April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, a routine test went horribly wrong, and two massive explosions blew off a 1,000-ton roof from one of its reactors. This caused 400 times more radiation than that dropped on Hiroshima to be released, as well as taking the lives of two nuclear plant operators. This disaster would eventually cause thousands within months to show signs of health effects, including cancer, and lives were lost due to radioactive fallout. In Sardin inaccessible Chernobyl basement identified as 305-2, researchers have detected a steady spike in the number of neutrons. The steady spike in the room's radiation levels indicate that it's experiencing new nuclear reactions. For now, the radioactivity is only smoldering, like embers in a barbecue pit. However, scientists remain vigilant, as it's possible for these embers to ignite and spark another nuclear explosion. The good news is that if the material ignites, it will be contained by a steel and concrete cage called the shelter that was built around the ruined reactor a year ago after the infamous nuclear meltdown. To this day, plant managers have yet to figure out how to access the tons of smoldering radioactive material, saying that it's buried below a thick layer of concrete. The reason for this is that the radiation levels are too high and would be hazardous to humans. However, radiation-resistant robots could drill through the debris and install neutron-absorbing control rods into the radioactive area. The latest news on this is that by September, Ukraine hopes to present a detailed plan for the removal of Chernobyl's still smoldering area. Another recent announcement is that children of Chernobyl's parents have no high number of DNA mutations. After the unrest of the 1940s, the world was in a state of upheaval when the governments turned their attention to harnessing nuclear power. This led to the development of a new and efficient power source. The first nuclear reactor to produce electricity was built in England and was connected to the national power grid in August 1956. Rest of the world followed, and by the 1970s, nuclear power plants were common in many places around the world. However, while nuclear power is renewable and does not produce harmful greenhouse gases, it does have its problems. Mainly that nuclear power can have dangerous consequences, especially if an accident occurs. The Chernobyl power plant was one such place. The children of Chernobyl has long been believed that babies born to survivors of nuclear accidents are more likely to have severe mutations or develop health concerns. But now a study reveals this is not the case, as children whose parents were exposed to radiation from Chernobyl had no more mutations than those who were not, suggesting these beliefs about deformities and diseases have little basis in fact. This study published in Science is one of the first to evaluate alterations in human mutations, and this is following a man-made nuclear disaster. The findings were not only interesting but also beneficial, because they also reassure other people who may have been exposed to radiation, such as those living near the Fukushima plant in Japan, and that it's safe for them to return home and have children. The study was conducted by scientists who analyzed the DNA of 130 children. To parents who were either involved in the cleanup after Chernobyl or evacuated from nearby towns. To ensure the best possible data, all the children studied were conceived after the nuclear accident. The results suggest that despite potential damage to their parents' reproductive cells, there is no increase in mutations among the children who were born after the Chernobyl incident. Chernobyl has become a refuge for wildlife. 33 years after the nuclear accident, one of the areas more heavily affected by the radiation became known as the Red Forest. This area received some of the highest doses of radiation, and its pine trees perished immediately. Few animals survived in this high radiation zone as well. But today, 33 years later, there are animals like brown bears and bison living within these locations. Studies have shown that the area where Chernobyl was located is home to great biodiversity and lacks significant negative effects from the radiation. Though the radiation had no significant effects on the wildlife, there were still some. For example, some insects seem to have shorter lifespans and are more affected by parasites in areas of high radiation. Some birds also tend to be born with high levels of albinism, along with other psychological changes when living around highly contaminated areas. Scientists have been trying to figure out why animals and plants near Chernobyl have been able to thrive. While they do not have any definitive answers, they do have a couple of theories. Firstly, wildlife could be much more resistant to radioactive substances. Another theory is that some organisms could be starting to show adaptive responses. Lastly, the absence of humans in this era may favor many species, such as big mammals in particular. Animals and plants were able to return. However, when the disaster happened, it was not just animals and wildlife that were at risk. Human life was also threatened by radiation from Chernobyl's nuclear meltdown. The question is, will humans be able to return anytime soon? The answer is people are already moving back. Elderly people from the Chernobyl area have already moved back to their homes. It is estimated that 100 people live in the area. Controversy reigns over how safe it is to live at Chernobyl. The outlying areas are relatively okay to live in, but the city of Pripyat, Ukraine, where the reactor is located, is not. This city will have to remain empty for at least 3,000 years because of dangerously high nuclear contaminated levels. So what do you make of these Chernobyl discoveries? Christianity has dominated the earth for centuries, bringing with it reverence and scrutiny through the ages. Countless secrets and hidden mysteries often have Christianity at their heart, especially ancient and medieval manuscripts and intrigues. So today, we'll be taking a look at several mysteries and discoveries surrounding religion. The removal of books. The Bible is composed of lots of different books, such as Genesis, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's thought of as a holy, gospel truth by millions around the globe, written by Moses and others around 1000 BC. It tells of Jesus' miracles, from the well-known tale of the Good Samaritan to when he fed the thousands with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. In fact, the Bible is the most printed book in the world, with around 5 billion copies produced. While the Bible and the Christian Church are often associated with the cleansing of sins, honesty, and acting in good faith, many are convinced that the Vatican is hiding secrets. The Bible was translated from Latin to English in the early modern period around the 1600s. However, the original version actually contained more books than present in modern versions. Naturally, people found this a little bit strange. Included in the original book were the Apocrypha books, which made up the end of the Old Testament. The 14 scriptures are known, but they are still yet to be printed in modern-day versions, leaving many to wonder what are the church hiding. The Vatican supposedly removed these 14 books in the 1680s, but little is known as to why. Some people believe that it was to do with a book titled The Wisdom of Solomon. Solomon was a legendary figure in ancient times. He was meant to be the wisest man ever to live and is thought to be a generally kind and well-managed soul. However, the Wisdom of Solomon presents him as less of an untroubled man. In his book, Solomon predicts great evils and the coming of somebody who is thought to be Jesus. Given Solomon passed away 900 years before Jesus, this theory, for some, is thought to be credible. However, a wise yet crazy guy predicting the coming of Jesus maybe didn't sound right to the church, and given that Solomon was known to be a follower of the occult, you can probably understand why the Catholic Church may have not been too inclined to keep his preaching in the Bible. Similarly, Jesus' name was actually changed to Yahushua, spelled I-E-S-U-S in the first edition of the Bible. So why is this? Religious historians find this odd and are struggling to come to a definitive answer about why the Vatican allegedly removed these missing books. However, it is possible that some in the church were keen to rewrite history. Why? We don't know, but it is very strange nonetheless. New details emerge. The Shroud of Turin's authenticity has been hotly debated since its first appearance in 1390, while also holding firm the position as one of the most well-known relics of the Catholic Church. Finally, in 1988, a team of scientists were given permission to cut small samples of the cloth and sent it out to 3 different laboratories, all of whom independently dated the cloth to 1260 to 1390 AD. However, even the seemingly definitive results were contested, as critics claimed that the test swatches were from relatively more recent areas where the shroud had been patched, contaminated by a fire in the 16th century, or delivered inaccurate results due to the number of people who have handled the cloth over the centuries. There is vast amounts of evidence for both sides. Full-body image of a man lying with his hands crossed over himself as though for burial, with markings on his wrists. In the Middle Ages, Jesus Christ was also depicted with crucifixion marks over his palms, although in biblical days they would in fact have driven the stakes through the wrists. Additionally, experts remain mystified as to what could have created such an accurate negative image of a man on the cloth. Tests analyzing the cloth have found no evidence of pigments, paints, dyes, or stains on the fiber, while also confirming that at some point in its past the cloth had been in direct contact with the body. However, some experts believe that the Middle Ages date of the shroud points to its use as a burial shroud for a crucifixion victim of the day, centuries after Jesus was crucified. Adding to speculation, in 2018, a blood stain pattern analysis was performed on the shroud and concluded that the faint blood flow stains came from different angles and were not produced by one body as it was being laid out for burial. Believers in the shroud have also pointed out that the Middle Ages radiocarbon date could have been based on years of the shroud being on public display for believers to touch, kiss, and pray over after its reveal in the 14th century, as well as possible carbon monoxide contamination, both instances which could conceivably cause a first-century artifact to be inaccurately dated as Middle Ages. The Vatican's secret religious artifacts aliens might be a bit far-fetched when we speculate about the secret artifacts held in the Vatican. Given that the actual archives are so difficult to get access to, it's normal that theories as to what is hiding in there will arise. There is thought to be proof of Jesus' existence in the archives, held away from the majority of scholars or historians wanting to visit. The evidence is extremely secretive but also consists of some fascinating relics. Before we talk about the proof of Jesus, however, there are a few other artifacts that are supposedly held in the Vatican archives, which are mind-blowing. In the 1950s, the Vatican strangely began funding a project being worked on by the world's leading scientists. The device they were making is thought to currently be the property of the Vatican. But what exactly is it? Well, it's thought to be a pair of glasses, but not just any pair. Glasses. These glasses allegedly allow the wearer to see into the past. The invention of this sort of device essentially throws what we believe are the limits of science and technology into complete disrepute. And because of this, you have to wonder why the Vatican is so keen on hiding the contraption. Could there be something that they don't want people to see through the glasses? Another of the projects thought to be in the archives is the third secret of Fatima. Fatima is a town and Catholic pilgrimage site, and during the times of Jesus, the children of the town reportedly saw visions of the Virgin Mary predicting 3 world events, including the First and Second World Wars. However, the third secret spoke of a huge persecution of Christians in the 20th century. Naturally, this persecution never occurred, leaving many to wonder whether this third secret was simply a fabrication and the Virgin Mary actually predicted something else, and that is yet to occur. Perhaps the most interesting artifact thought to be hidden in the Vatican archives is rumored to be the cross that Jesus Christ passed away on. Most people think that the cross that Jesus was crucified on was broken up into parts and over the years passed through religious institution. However, it is not known where any of the true parts of the cross are today, and this is where the Vatican steps in. Many think that the cross is stored in or below the Vatican archives. The Angel Nurse. This is a story of a miracle told by the mother of an ill child. The message, she says, was sent to her by an angel. In 1998, Luke, an 8-year-old boy, was diagnosed with cancer of the bone. While his recovery was not linear, he made steady, positive progress until he developed an infection. He stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks, struggling with the fight against his infection, with his mother staying at his bedside. Whilst he slept, she prayed and spoke to the Lord. One night during her prayers, a nurse entered the room to run a routine temperature check. Luke's mother felt there was something indescribably odd about the nurse. Though one notable distinction between her and other nurses was her uniform, which was an outdated nurse's uniform when you'd expect to see in the 60s, 3 decades prior. The nurse made polite conversation, commenting on the Bible on Luke's bedside, saying she too was Christian and so would pray for Luke's healing. This religious sentiment, coupled with the lack of a modern uniform compared to the other staff, has led Luke's mom to draw the conclusion that this nurse was an angel. Luke was 19, cancer-free, and in good health. He retold this story, explaining how not long after the visit from the nurse, he came out of the hospital fully healed of the infection. The pair are both in agreement that the nurse was a guardian angel, sent to watch over and protect Luke, but also to provide his mother with hope and reassurance. Luke says he believes this is the only explanation as to the nurse's unusual attire. But what do you make of these mysteries and discoveries surrounding religion? For years, everyday people had been reporting strange things in our sky. Recently, though, this has changed. We now have Navy and Army officials, along with scientists, researchers, and pilots detailing their accounts. Even former presidents have opened up about what they know. Another part of this topic is those that believe they've been taken onto these crafts. Oddly enough, many of these accounts seem to follow a similar theme. Usually the person complains about missing time. They will normally feel ill with symptoms including nausea, headaches, and having sensitive skin. Their clothes may have been ripped all torn, but they can never seem to remember the events that could have caused this to happen. Some of them have gone on to see doctors and practitioners that claim they are able to unlock memories, and they do this by using various techniques, including hypnosis and age regression. After these have been performed, some of those then go on to remember the events, saying that they were taken on board a mysterious craft and even communicated with mysterious entities. Although not everyone who goes through this needs repressed memory therapy, many do, and this is where the problems start. The idea of repressed memory therapy is controversial. Although many researchers have said our brains can theoretically repress memories, and even offer ways to help bring these out, there's no proof that is real. The brain is very complex, and there's still many things we don't understand about it. Many of the individuals that are taken on board these crafts just want answers. They feel vulnerable. They want to know the truth about what happened to them. Many are not involved in the UFO phenomena and have no interest in telling their story. Although it sounds like an interesting topic, many of the stories actually come across as terrifying. Although the majority say they were not harmed, they go into detail that they were taken against their will, held down by an invisible force, and was able to communicate with mysterious beings via telepathy. All of those things go against our teaching and what we know, so the encounters leaves the individuals lost and confused. There's also been men and women who have said that these beings have done tests on them, and these revolve around using humans to reproduce. For those unaware, believers and those who have been taken on board these crafts have said that they've had certain fluids taken from their bodies. And when asked, these entities have told them their species can no longer reproduce, so they use human DNA in order to carry on their species. As of right now, scientists are of course completely against this idea and have said that we have no proof whatsoever that something like this is going on, but a researcher at the University of Oxford in England has said that these encounters are real. The university professor Young Hai Chi, who teaches Korean, went on to detail that not only does he believe this is happening, but that he thinks he might know why. During some of his lectures, he's shared his opinion on the topic and said these entities are creating hybrids, and says that the proof behind this theory is the increase in reports. To support his theory, Chi says that after looking at the data, he's noticed that reports have increased every year. He said that one of the reasons why this is happening is so that humans will be better adapted to this planet, saying that climate change and greenhouse gases are causing a runaway effect. He notes that these encounters are a reaction to global warming that we're living through, saying that these entities are creating a new Homo sapien species that will be better adapted to the planet, and notes that over the last few decades they've been doing this and changing our DNA, saying that in the future don't be surprised if something comes along that will change our DNA. He goes on to note that many of these entities are living among us and that we don't even realize it. He said this has been happening for years and that these hybrids are created to mix with the general population, saying that most people wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. He said the following to NBC. The first-generation hybrids still have physical features distinctive to aliens, but from the second generation they have almost identical body features from those of humans, although they may still carry at least 1/4 of alien genes. It ends by saying that they live among us, and have been for years now. Not everyone buys this idea, though, and some have said these theories are based on nothing. Some have said, though, that it must be tough if something like this happens to you, and that when you try to talk to someone about it, you're branded as being unstable. As mentioned earlier, the majority of people who experience this just want answers. Scientists have said that sleep paralysis could explain these encounters, and why individuals genuinely believe that they've been taken by something unknown. Between 8 and 50% of people will experience this phenomenon at some point in their lives. 5% will even experience it more than once. Sleep paralysis overtakes you when you're in a state between sleep and wakefulness. A person is alert, but unable to move or speak. It's as if you're in sleep mode, and your body knows that, but your brain is alert. And if sudden, unusual paralysis wasn't enough, sleep paralysis is often accompanied by a strong sense of fear and hallucinations. Those who have gone through this ordeal, though, have said the two aren't the same. Interestingly, going back a while ago, Dr. Helen Sharman made the news after making an interesting statement. She said that aliens exist, and it's possible that they're among us on Earth. She said the following: aliens exist. There's no two ways about it. There must be all sorts of different forms of life among the billions of stars. Dr. Sharman is known as being the first British astronaut, the first woman to visit the MIRS space station in May of 1991. Her take on aliens is that they could be here right now and we may not be aware of it. So what do you make of these comments? For years, people have been fascinated by the unknown, with some even coming forward in detailing their own personal experiences. One thing that's been made obvious over the years, though, is that officials are starting to be more open about these kinds of topics, whereas rewind a few decades ago and many of these claims would have been laughed off. One agency that's been particularly critical of these types of stories is that of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, who have detailed out of the tens of thousands of images that they've taken, and that out of all their missions never once have they found something that would indicate intelligent life. With recent announcements, though, it's come to the attention of many that it's not just everyday people who have been seeing these mysterious objects in our sky. In fact, for decades now, high-up officials including Navy pilots, Army officials, and even government officials have detailed their encounter with mysterious crafts that's easily able to outmaneuver their jets, can disappear from radar, and even seem to interact with their equipment, and in some cases have even managed to shut them down. Sadly, in the past, pilots and other officials lost their jobs when they talked about this topic, but now there seems to have been a shift. People are openly talking about this topic, and although many haven't got the answers they wanted, they have said that we're making a step in the right direction. As mentioned, NASA have always stayed relatively quiet on the subject, and when asked about it, they've always denied that they've found anything of interest. Some people dispute these claims, though, as some of their images appear to show mysterious objects. Recently, CNN Business did an interview with Bill Nelson, an American politician and NASA payload specialist, who is now the 14th administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. One of the questions they asked him was the following: Americans have long been fascinated by UFOs, and the public has seen the videos that our Navy pilots have taken, and they've heard their accounts. Do you think that we've been contacted by extraterrestrials? To which Bill responded with the following: well, I have talked to those Navy pilots, and they are sure that they saw something, and of course we've seen their video from the jet. What is it? We don't know. So now that I'm here at NASA, I've turned to our scientists and I've said, would you look at it from a scientific standpoint? See if you can determine what it is so we have a better idea. We don't know if it's an enemy. We don't know if it's an optical phenomenon. We don't think it's an optical phenomenon because of the characteristics that those Navy pilots described. The next question was the following: the Pentagon will soon release its report on UFOs. What has NASA been briefed about in terms of this report? Have you been involved in any way? And do you think that NASA should be more involved? To which Bill responded, I was actually briefed on this a couple of years ago, in my capacity on the Senate Armed Services Committee. NASA is going to look at it through the lens of its scientists. We are involved in this research and I've started. I've been here a month and I've started. We are not directly working with the Pentagon, but I can guarantee you if we find something the Pentagon will know. As of right now, though, early leaks of the files have stated that the U.S. found no evidence of alien tech, but did explain that they can't rule out exotic phenomena, to which people responded that it's not very clear what they're saying. Many amateur researchers have spent years looking at this topic, and have said that NASA likely won't admit that these crafts are anything of interest. Although amateur researchers have congratulated the agency on some of their discoveries, when it comes to UFOs and related topics, they are known to shut down claims immediately. Interestingly, NASA scientists have said there's over 100 billion planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. There's hundreds of millions of galaxies, all teeming with millions or billions of planets. This makes the likelihood of there being life in our universe very high. This is why NASA and other space agencies are now making it their goal to visit various systems. This photograph has been shared around a lot on social media, and those who've tried to find the origin of the photo have said it was taken during the Space Transportation System 1. The STS-1 was part of NASA's Space Shuttle program. As stated on their website, on the morning of April 12, 1981, 2 astronauts sat strapped into their seats on the flight deck of Columbia, a radically new spacecraft known as the Space Shuttle. John Young, the commander, had already flown in space 4 times, including a walk on the moon in 1972. Bob Crippen, the pilot, was a Navy test pilot who'd gone on to command 3 future shuttle missions, but nothing either man had done or would do was quite like this. Some have suggested that the image in question shows the mysterious Black Knight satellite. Those who have studied it have said the satellite is the oldest one currently orbiting our planet. It is considered by some to be an ancient object that's been transmitting signals for thousands of years. This mysterious signal has been featured in the media since the 1950s, and it's become one of the most talked about objects in space. Some have even said the satellite was placed there in order to spy on the human race. One of the first people to allegedly pick up on the object was that of Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-American inventor who would change the world we live in. Those who have been looking for signs of extraterrestrial life have said this satellite is one of the best pieces of evidence we have. As some have pointed out, though, one of the issues nowadays when it comes to UFOs is that there's so many good fakes out there, and this makes it difficult to find genuine ones. It's also important to note that researchers and scientists have said that Black Knight satellite is not real, and that what people are seeing is just space debris. What do you make of this recent announcement by NASA's new administrator?